Hi everyone, I thought I'd take the opportunity to put a small buying guide together for the X-Type, specifically the V6. There's a few buyer's guides out there, but most aren't from owners of these cars, and those which are from quite die-hard owners from what I've seen, which means getting an objective view of the pros and cons of the X-Type can be a little bit difficult, so I'm here to fill that gap. This is my own 2003 3-litre auto, so the guide's going to be based around that predominantly. Although it is petrol oriented, a lot of it will also apply to the diesel models, so we'll cover off on a couple of the regular issues faced by those diesel owners. The first thing that you're going to notice is that the car is blatantly modified. There's a long list which I can cover in future videos, but the vast majority of mods are cosmetic only because that's just my preference. They won't have an impact on your purchase decision here, I don't think. Something breaks or wears out and I'll consider if I modify it or replace it like for like to get the car back on the road. First thing for you to consider if you're a particularly long person is cabin space. Legroom in the front is often plentiful as you'd expect from a small saloon like this, but in the rear it can be compromised if you've got long legs to accommodate at either end. Headroom in the back is slightly less than in other saloons in the same price bracket like the Saab 9-3 or dare I mention the Mondeo. And if you've got a child seat to fit, then this shows you how much space you'll be left with. Look out for the sagging headliners, which will necessitate full removal and refitting, which is a bit of a horrible job, and the small bit of trim covering the rear of the centre console screws often gets lost. Personally, I really like the lines at the back of the saloon. The body kit on this car is an XS body kit, which was limited to a few production years, circa 2003 to 5, and also the Indianapolis. This car is an SE spec, so specifically not a sport, which means that you've got the chrome bumper blades rather than colour-coded, and no boot spoiler. Getting into the car, you can see it's got the 2001 to 2004 early type steering wheel. It's equipped with bird's eye maple interior panelling and dove grey trim. The exterior colour is zircon, which is sort of a blue-grey. You can see from the chart here that the launch colours were quite varied. More exterior colours were added later, such as Tonga green, lazulite blue, blue prism, Roman bronze, that sort of thing. And interior colours were revised as well, with minor changes offered. The range was kind of broad. Cars could be spec'd with any colour combination, however the Sovereign's got specific contrasting piped leather trim and walnut panelling. And the later Sport Premium has a unique diamond stitched style seat, which is desirable to many. That also came with matching door cards. Interiors can be retrofitted, swapped about, but obviously retain your passenger seat sensor wiring because it's part of the vehicle security system. This car is spec'd with a standard audio system. If you've got the upgrade, you'll have a component speaker in each of the front door handles, and you'll have a subwoofer in the boot. It's also got the factory sat-nav with a resistive touchscreen, so you can use gloves with it when the temperature drops. You can also see the heated seat buttons there, which get used at the same time as the gloves. The main drawback of the factory nav system, though, is that the latest disc is 2012, so don't expect it to be up to that much. And that phone button is useless on pretty much all X-Types. Even on later units with the Bluetooth module, it doesn't stream music. You can upgrade to a Jag Droid or use your phone. Also, you can see I've fitted a USB charging and voltmeter system here. If you've got the traditional air conditioning controls, you can fit a universal double DIN system, but there isn't much depth available, so many aren't going to fit. Cars facelifted in 2008 have got the silver accented vents and radio elements as opposed to earlier cars with the black ones. Again, being that this is a pre-2004 car, it's got the rear mounted button for boot release as opposed to a hidden button, which the later spec cars have. All have boot releases on the fob, so that's at least a useful addition. Space in the boot is superb as long as you've got a bunch of long thin things to put in there, and you can see that this one's got the factory subwoofer system on the underside of the parcel shelf, and I've also fitted an LED strip just in front of it because the factory light is frankly awful, pretty useless. Some cars like the SE have got split folding rear seats which are released by plungers either side of the top of the boot, but even without this feature it will take a couple of suitcases and the all important golf clubs. You should have a full-size spare wheel, jack, wheel brace and locking nut key here, though a word to the wise about the factory wheel nuts in a moment. And navigation drive, CD changer, phone unit, all the rest of it if they're fitted, they're all behind this panel here. Bulb changes are a pain because unlike many cars the X-Type saloon's got no access hatch, therefore the boot carpet needs to be peeled back to access the lamp holders that necessitates the removal of that plastic shield you see there. The saloon especially is known for breaks in the cables here to the tailgate, which causes the boot lid to remain permanently closed if they break. And if you're planning to replace these struts with self-opening ones, just be careful that they don't damage the hinge by applying too much pressure to the mechanism. They can be considerably more powerful. Another quirk is the FM/AM antenna grounds through the rear demister, so any corrosion in there is going to kill your reception whenever the demister is on. Fun! But enough about the golf club storage and interior features. If you're buying a V6 X-Type, your main interest is probably this. The 3 litre is a lovely engine to push. It's refined, it's got a definite power step around 4000 RPM courtesy of the VVT, and for those not in the know, it's a real mongrel of an engine. It's had input from Porsche, Mazda, Ford, Cosworth. Cosworth did the heads. It's strong, it's reliable, and even if most of them have oil leaks, it's been proven to hold big power through turbocharging and similar, with Noble working on it. So it's got its pedigree despite being the mongrel that it is. There's not a great deal of difference between the 2.5 and the 3 litre if we're honest, but the 30 horsepower or so extra that you will get in the bigger engine probably will win at higher speeds. The 2.1 isn't as gutless as people make out, although being front wheel drive it doesn't bed in as much as the all wheel drive ones do. In 2004 the transfer box was updated. Many potential buyers think the transfer box is a weak point on the X-Type, but it's really not the case. Ones which failed early usually just didn't have enough oil in them, or components weren't adequately greased during assembly and they ended up being replaced under warranty. Most that have survived this far have had all their fluids replaced anyway, so they should be fine. The updated transfer box in 2004 reduced the rear end bias and the stress on the rear diff. This one's an early transfer box, which makes it more of a 60% rear bias, therefore it's more entertaining on loose or frozen surface. I mean, all that being said, when test driving any all-wheel drive X-Type, you're going to need to listen for any bangs or whines or humming sounds from the drivetrain, because the transfer box especially can cost a small fortune to repair or replace. Most are fine though, so don't be put off by abnormal sounds immediately. Things like failing wheel bearings can sound like they come from centre support bearings or the transfer box or even the rear differentials, and I mean the diffs on these things especially are known to be quite decent, considering how many of them have been run low on oil and survived. The auto box is a Jatco JF506E. It's nothing like the 6-speed auto in the 2.2 diesel, and it's not really renowned for long-term reliability. Maximum torque is rated at 310 Newton meters, which when you consider the 3 litre itself is rated at 279, is only 10% headroom, which isn't really ideal. Personally, I found the limit on this one, so it's been rebuilt. That was the Ford gears. But I mean, that said, they can do big miles when they're looked after, and 20 years between rebuilds isn't too bad really in the grand scheme of things. The manual box is better on economy and power delivery, so it is kind of preferred, but a V6 burble through an auto box is a lovely sound nonetheless. An auto box rebuild isn't too much more money than a clutch replacement on a manual, so financially it shouldn't really be a big deal maker, at least not in my books. Do bear in mind the Jaguar's sealed for life policy on the auto boxes, transfer box and rear diff has been debunked for many years now, so make sure that the fluids have been changed or budget to have them done. Ultimately though, during your test drive you shouldn't have any misfires, you shouldn't have any engine management lights on, no gearbox faults, nothing like that. So unless you're buying a known project, try to keep it as clean as possible, you don't want any problems. Back outside the car, a few other things to check include the waste seals at the base of each window. They very often show corrosion, as in this image, and they are quite expensive to replace. And also just confirm that you've got 2 keys which both work to start the car as well as lock and unlock it. So those are 2 separate parts of the key, and you can program a new remote to lock and unlock the vehicle yourself, but a key to start the car physically requires transponder programming with either Jaguar SSD or other specialist software. This car's got the information system in the instrument cluster, which gives you trip info. Not all spec of cars have this, but it is quite useful to have. But because each spec is almost unique, it pays to know what is available. So for instance, in this car, folding mirrors, this one doesn't have. The presence of 2 adjustment knobs below the headlight switch indicate that this car is equipped with halogen headlights rather than the xenon. In some parts of the world, the absence of the headlight levelling is because it's simply fixed, not that it has xenon headlights, so again it pays to double check under the bonnet, which we'll get to in a bit. These vents persistently pop up due to the heat they experience, but epoxy silicone or grab adhesive often holds them down. That side's got a light sensor in it for your automatic headlights if fitted as well, so just be aware of that. Ford saw fit to provide you with the option to display the Jaguar logo for your passengers. And if you're wondering quite what the whirring noise is you hear when you get into the car, it's the climate control internal air temperature sensor behind that grille, which has probably got a sizable dust bunny in it. We spoke about wheel nuts about 5 minutes ago. Get rid of the original 2-piece Jag ones and replace them with 1-piece Toyota ones. These are aftermarket, so they're different altogether, but the Jaguar ones tend to split, which you'll probably only find out about when you need to have the wheel off, and you may well need therapy to recover from your experience. Toyota ones are 21mm rather than 19, so you're going to need to carry a different wheel brace ideally, but that compromise is far better for your mental health, trust me. The 2001 to 2004 X-Type had some different rear calipers to the later version. Those can be told apart by the fact that they've got rounded ears on the pads as opposed to square ones. Final point of note really in this guide is your fuel release flap is positioned there. There's also a helpful reminder on the fuel gauge as to which side the flap is on. Sooner or later you're also going to need to know where the OBD port is located, and it is here. Fun fact, by law every car sold in the US needs to have the OBD port within 3 feet of the driver's seat, so who says bureaucracy was a bad thing? And before we leave this area entirely, that hole there on the right, I know there should be a cover on it, is where the fuel pump reset button is. If you hit a big enough pothole or you have an accident, this breaker will activate and the car will not start. Finally, taking a look under the bonnet here, we've got a lovely big V6. Make sure that both the bonnet release latches function and are greased. Pre-2004 models have the engine covers, which you can see here, though mine are painted. Check the coolant levels because those often leak at the T-piece and actually throughout the entire system. The thermostat is buried down there. It's a pain to change, which you can see courtesy of my open air filter. Have a look at my other videos for a how-to on that, because why not? Here for a good time, not a long time, right? The PCV hose on top of the engine there often splits, which causes a lean code. It's a simple aftermarket hose solution here, less than a tenner. Jaguar sells an upgrade. You can see the throttle body there. You may be able to find oil leaks on the rear cam cover, since those are quite common, although usually more easy to spot from the other side. Connections for VVT are also prone to leaking, though as you can see mine are fine. The rear cam cover was resealed a few years back. You can always check the front cover as well. Headlight bulb changes are a pain even on this early V6 with the ABS module further back than in later models. The internal adjusters are weak, they often fail, and the washer hoses don't help in access. Your engine oil dipstick is here, water pump down there. The original design used a plastic impeller which is known to fail. Any overheating, check the water pump as well as the thermostat. Power steering fluid in there. Whilst you're here, check the condition of the suspension components as well. I'm running new Bilstein shocks, so the nuts are new and you should have no corrosion there at all. Everyone tells you to check the sills, so that's really a given. Their design makes them guaranteed to corrode wherever you've got a high moisture level or road salt. And there are other guides on how to check this, so have a YouTube hunt and you'll be right as rain. The easiest method really is to use a screwdriver against them to see if you can puncture it, but I mean, if they're beginning to fail, it's not a huge amount of money to replace them, so I'd always advocate doing so and keeping more of these cars on the road. I know it's not been a totally comprehensive buying guide here, but I really hope it conveys much of how I feel that the car is to own and what really to look out for when buying. There are a lot of scare stories about, and when I first bought the car it was purely as a stopgap vehicle, but 5 years on I'm definitely an X-Type convert, even though I could never really call it the most reliable or economical car I've ever owned. On a long run, the 3 litre can deliver over 35 miles to your finest Imperial gallon, which is about 29 miles to the US one, and for my metric men out there it's less than 8 litres of fuel per 100 kilometres, so it's not too bad. The V6 auto sound through the Adamesh exhaust that I've got fitted, and the interior comfort, general driving experience more than make up for that. So the cost per mile for me is about 30 pence over the past 20,000 miles, which includes all repairs, service parts, tax, insurance and so forth, so I'm not too upset with that in the slightest. I've had to replace the radiator and much of the cooling system, plugs, coils, all suspension components, section of exhaust, much more than that. but I don't really regret any of it. Would I buy another? Yeah, absolutely. Would I recommend you get one? Well, it sort of depends. It's, you know, it's an older car. If you appreciate the looks, you don't mind a car that you may have to do some work on or pay someone else to maintain, then by all means get one. It's got elements of modernity mixed in with an older vehicle. Personally, I really like the balance. If you're on the fence, buy one. What's the worst that could happen?